The words still echo in my head, sharper than any gavel I ever struck. Your son deserves the death penalty. The moment those words left her mouth, time splintered. The courtroom froze. For a few endless heartbeats, no one dared to breathe. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the rustling of a paper, the faint hitch of someone's gasp, but mostly, I heard my own pulse pounding like a war drum. My son, Liam, sank into his wheelchair as though the weight of that cruel phrase had crushed the air out of him. His knuckles whitened against the armrest, his pale face drawn tight with shock. That trembling boy was still my fierce, stubborn son, but in that instant he looked impossibly small, like the world had turned colder just for him. And the voice that had spoken, the poisonous voice that had dared to condemn him, belonged not to a judge, not to anyone with authority or compassion, but to Veronica Hale, the self-crowned queen of Maplewood Heights, the HOA president, a woman who believed property lines measured worth, and that perfection was something you enforced through fines and intimidation. For 10 straight months, she had built a quiet arsenal of petty cruelty, fines, threats, lies, fabricated violations that piled up like stones meant to bury my son alive. She wanted to break his spirit, to strip away his independence piece by piece. She had turned a neighborhood rulebook into a weapon. But what she didn't know, what no one yet understood, was that I, Daniel Bennett, wasn't just another resident at her mercy. I had spent decades walking the halls of justice. I knew how evidence was built, how arrogance revealed guilt, and how truth, handled correctly, could cut sharper than any blade. Every email she sent, every false claim she filed, every whispered insult, meticulously documented, carefully preserved. Her cruelty had been digging a grave for months, and now, finally, she was standing at its edge. This was never just about HOA rules or grass height or the angle of a mailbox. This was about dignity, resilience, and how far a parent will go when love turns into the most patient kind of fury. That morning, the courthouse crackled with tension even before she arrived. The very air felt thicker, like invisible hands pressing down on everyone seated inside. You could sense something monumental approaching, a human storm. Then came the sound. Click, click, click. The measured strike of heels against marble floors, her entrance music. The scent of strong, expensive perfume trailed behind her like a flag announcing power. Veronica Hale knew how to control a room before she said a single word. And as she stepped through those doors, her back straight, her chin high, she scanned every face like she was inspecting her kingdom. She wore authority the way others wore jewelry. Gaudy, overdone, flaunted without shame. She didn't look at Liam when she passed by him, though she paused just long enough to let him feel her shadow. She didn't refuse to see him out of accident. No, she refused out of choice. In her perfect porcelain world, people like my son didn't exist. His wheelchair didn't fit into her neatly curated vision board of perfection. And that indifference, that cruel blindness, made her daring. When she spoke, her words cracked open the room. Your son deserves the death penalty. You could feel the silence that followed. It wasn't ordinary quiet. It was the kind that chills your spine. The kind that makes you question whether you really heard what you just heard. The jurors stared, open-mouthed. The stenographer froze in place. The bailiff half rose, uncertain if this was real life. Liam went rigid, his shoulders quivering as he tried to hold it together. I reached for him instinctively, gripping his arm, feeling how cold his skin had become. Rage and disbelief tangled inside me. Not fear, just a stunned kind of fury that something so indecent could be spoken aloud in a court built for justice. And in that frozen, unbearable silence, one truth blazed clear. Veronica Hale had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought I was just another angry parent, another voice she could dismiss with a fake smile and a condescending tone. She didn't know that I had once sat on that very bench, that for 22 years I had watched liars crumble under evidence, and tyrants cornered by their own words. She had stepped into the wrong courtroom, challenged the wrong family, and unleashed the wrong man's fury. For 10 months, her cruelty had been slow and deliberate. It started small. A complaint about Liam's grass growing an inch above some arbitrary limit. Then a warning about the mailbox being misaligned. Soon it was daily harassment. Cars parked too long. Visitors overstaying invisible curfews. She turned order into obsession. Every note she left, every smirk behind her windowsill, was another piece in her psychological warfare. She kept a leather notebook filled with invented infractions. She watched through her binoculars from dawn until dusk, recording every innocuous movement outside Liam's house, our family's house, and twisting them into accusations. Liam's home on 1423 Alderwood Lane wasn't just a place. It was a family pillar. My father built that craftsman bungalow himself, oak floors that creaked when you told a secret, a wraparound porch that caught golden light at sunset. It was where my son relearned how to walk after he lost his leg, where he found peace and independence. He had made it his own. A smart, self-sufficient workspace where he ran his IT business, lines of code on bright screens glowing like proof of his perseverance. His silver BMW on the drive wasn't luxury, it was victory. Every client who praised him added another layer to the confidence he'd rebuilt from rubble. He was known around Maplewood Heights as kind, reliable, humble. He waved to every kid, helped neighbors fix routers, shoveled snow for Mrs. Alvarez without being asked. And somehow that, his decency, his quiet success, was what enraged Veronica the most. From across the street, she watched him with growing venom. Her own house, oversized and underloved, was a sterile palace of envy. Her two sons were reminders of everything she couldn't control. One lost to the system, the other barely hanging on. When she looked at Liam, thriving despite hardship, she saw all her own failures reflected back at her. So she did what bitter tyrants always do when they can't build. She decided to destroy. That morning, when I looked down at my son, I saw both exhaustion and defiance painted across his face. He'd been through months of humiliation, but that spark inside him, quiet, unwavering determination, still glowed. "Dad," he whispered, so faintly I almost missed it. "We'll get through this, right?" I nodded. My throat burned from holding back emotion. "We will, son. I promise." Reporters leaned closer with their cameras. The murmur of voices rippled through the crowd. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to vibrate with apprehension. The tension in that room wasn't just about legal arguments. It was personal, visceral, electric. Veronica strutted across the polished floor as if she owned it. Every tap of her heel against stone sounded like a countdown to her own undoing. I could feel the old instincts returning. The judge's discipline mixed with a father's fury. I calculated silently, knowing each word I would choose, each piece of evidence that would burn her facade to ashes. I wasn't here to snap back or shout. I was here to end her reign of cruelty within the confines of law and undeniable proof. Even the neighbors, sitting at the back, seemed to sense it. Mrs. Alvarez held her purse close, glancing between me and Liam with watery eyes. The Parkers whispered behind their hands. They all knew this had gone too far, that this wasn't about property lines anymore, but about decency itself. Then Veronica spoke again, her frustration spilling into venom. "He should be punished," she snapped. "He doesn't deserve to live freely while my son suffers." Her voice cracked with self-righteous hysteria. The sound scraped every nerve in the room raw. Jurors stiffened. The court reporter froze mid-keystroke. Even the judge blinked, momentarily stunned by the indecency. It wasn't just hatred. It was madness dressed as justice. And in that instant, I knew this wasn't a hearing. It was a reckoning. This was no longer about property rights or neighborhood order. It was about a father defending his son's right to exist unshamed. It was about drawing a permanent line between cruelty and consequence. I tightened my grip on Liam's wheelchair until the metal bit into my palms. His small hand found mine, trembling but steadying us both. The day ahead would be long and brutal, but one truth burned brighter than any fear. We would not back down. Because Liam Bennett had always been more than his injury. He was a man who built freedom out of adversity. Despite losing his right leg years ago, he had carved a life rich with pride and purpose. From his quiet home office, he earned respect and friendship across the world, one keystroke at a time. That modest bungalow on Alderwood Lane? It wasn't just a house, it was his sanctuary. His evidence that strength isn't measured by what you keep, but by what no one can take away. And we were about to prove that in a courtroom built for truth. A place where his independence was respected. And yet this very life he had painstakingly built was exactly what Veronica Hale, the HOA president, sought to destroy. Veronica's obsession with Liam began subtly. At first it was little things. A misplaced trash can, a mailbox, slightly misaligned grass she claimed was too long. But those trivialities quickly escalated into weaponized harassment. She would measure Liam's lawn with a ruler, take photos of any perceived violation, and document everything meticulously in her leather-bound notebook. She monitored every visitor, timed how long they parked in front of the house, and noted every interaction as if she were compiling a dossier on a criminal. To her, Liam's success, his independence, his very ability to thrive despite his disability, was intolerable. Neighbors began to notice the tension long before the first violation notice appeared. Mrs. Alvarez, a kind woman who lived down the street, often saw Veronica with binoculars pressed to her eyes, scribbling furiously. The Parkers, a retired couple who had known the Bennett family for decades, mentioned quietly that they had never seen such obsession from anyone in Maplewood Heights. They didn't know the full story, but they could sense the malice radiating from Veronica's constant surveillance. Meanwhile, Liam's life continued in defiance of her scrutiny. He maintained a strict routine, balancing work, exercise, and social interactions. He was careful, precise, and relentlessly kind. Every day he would roll out his wheelchair ramp, professionally installed, and city-approved for years, and greet neighbors with a smile. He would wave, nod, and sometimes pause for a quick conversation, demonstrating that disability did not equate to weakness. He lived his life openly and with dignity, and yet that dignity only fueled Veronica's envy and rage. Her strategy was simple, but cruelly effective. Each citation, each fine, was designed to chip away at Liam's confidence to create chaos in his daily life. One morning, a notice would appear on his door claiming his grass was too long by a fraction of an inch. The next day, his wheelchair ramp would be deemed a structural violation, accompanied by an exorbitant daily fine. Visitors to his home would trigger additional penalties. Birthday parties, Sunday barbecues, even football nights became opportunities for harassment. Veronica had transformed HOA regulations into instruments of torture, and she did it systematically, knowing every step would cause maximum stress. I watched these developments unfold with a mixture of anger, helplessness, and determination. As his father, it pained me to see Liam subjected to such relentless cruelty. But as a man who had spent decades in the judicial system, he recognized an opportunity. Every action Veronica took, every violation she issued, every note in her notebook was evidence, and if collected methodically, it could be turned against her. I began quietly documenting everything, taking photographs, recording audio, and maintaining detailed logs of her harassment. Liam, despite everything, continued to act with grace, never allowing her malice to provoke him into retaliation. Yet the psychological toll on Liam was real. Even with his usual strength of character, the constant barrage of fines, letters, and intrusive surveillance began to wear him down. He would sometimes stare at the wall in his office, lost in thought, calculating how to manage the mounting fines and deadlines. I noticed the subtle signs. His posture would slump slightly. His smile would falter at unexpected times, and small traces of anxiety would flicker in his eyes. These were thesalent consequences of Veronica's campaign, consequences designed to intimidate and undermine. Despite these challenges, Liam refused to be passive. He continued to manage his work, taking on complex projects and ensuring that his clients' needs were met without compromise. He even invited neighbors to occasional gatherings, seeking to maintain community ties despite Veronica's antagonism. Every act of normalcy became an act of defiance against the cruelty imposed by someone who believed she had the power to dictate the quality of life for others. Veronica, meanwhile, escalated her tactics. She began making inquiries into Liam's income, probing into his inheritance, and attempting to uncover anything that could justify her obsession. She questioned neighbors innocently about his lifestyle and success, her eyes glinting with envy when the truth became apparent. Liam's life was thriving, independent, and untainted by misfortune beyond his accident. The stark contrast between his accomplishments and her personal failures, her troubled children, the bitterness that had long festered in her own life, fueled her cruelty further. At this point, it became clear that her actions were no longer about enforcing HOA rules. They were personal. Each citation, each violation, and each confrontation was a deliberate act of targeting my son, exploiting his disability as a perceived weakness. The obsession was so focused, so intense that it seemed to border on pathological. She was no longer a neighbor enforcing community standards. She had become a predator, and Liam was her unwilling prey. I began preparing for the eventual confrontation, knowing that the day would come when our patience and documentation would be tested to their limits. Each encounter with Veronica, each letter she sent, and each attempt to intimidate Liam was logged, time-stamped, and analyzed. We built a system, a meticulous archive that chronicled not just the violations themselves, but also the psychological impact and the broader pattern of discrimination. This archive would later become central to exposing the full scope of her harassment. Even as the situation worsened, Liam maintained his composure. I marveled at his resilience, the way he carried himself with quiet dignity despite the constant attacks. He had mastered a balance that few could imagine: a life of independence, achievement, and kindness, while navigating the cruelty of someone determined to undermine him. Every smile, every greeting to neighbors, Every act of normally became a silent statement he would not be defeated by malice, envy, or cruelty. Our private moments when the house was quiet and the world outside seemed oblivious became critical. Liam would occasionally voice his fears quietly and honestly about their relentless pressure and the uncertainty of what Veronica might do next. I listened, comforted him, and began formulating a plan. Not one of retaliation and anger, but one rooted in strategy law and the full measure of evidence we had begun to gather. The balance between fear and preparation defined those months. Every day presented new challenges, new threats, and new opportunities to document and prepare. Liam's commitment to living with dignity, his refusal to allow disability to define him, was the cornerstone of our defense. Meanwhile, Veronica's obsession grew fueled by envy, personal failure, and a misunderstanding of the consequences of her actions. She had no idea that the father watching his son suffer was simultaneously preparing the ultimate response, one that would turn her own weaponized HOA tactics against her and ensure that justice would prevail in ways she could never anticipate. By the time the first major court hearing arrived, the stakes could not have been higher. Liam was prepared to face his tormentor, armed with the quiet strength of someone who had endured months of calculated harassment. I, Daniel Bennett, stood beside him, not just as his father, but as someone intimately familiar with the inner workings of the legal system, ready to channel decades of experience into protecting my son. It was clear that the confrontation would define more than just the outcome of this particular dispute. It would set a precedent for how cruelty, envy, and abuse of authority are met with accountability. Veronica believed she had power. She believed she could dictate the terms of life and liberty for my son. She had no idea that she had stepped into a courtroom where every move, every action, and every word would be met with unwavering resolve. As Liam's eyes met mine that morning, I could see the trust and courage reflecting back at me. The months of harassment had not broken him. They had honed his resolve. And in that quiet exchange, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. No amount of intimidation, envy, or malice could shatter the bond between a father and his son when combined with the relentless pursuit of justice. We were ready. Veronica had underestimated us. She had underestimated the strength of family, the weight of evidence meticulously collected, and the strategic patience born of decades in the judicial system. Her reign of terror had prepared us for this moment, and the storm that would soon engulf her was just beginning. Veronica Hale's campaign of harassment escalated from subtle intimidation to outright aggression with frightening precision. It wasn't haphazard or reactive. It was a meticulously orchestrated series of attacks designed to undermine every facet of Liam Bennett's life. Every morning he would wake to another notice pinned to his door, each one more absurd than the last. The first might claim his grass exceeded HOA regulations by half an inch, a claim Veronica personally verified with a ruler kneeling in Thedoui morning light to snap photographs, as if collecting evidence for a criminal trial. The next would accuse him of building an unauthorized structure in his backyard, referring to the wheelchair ramp professionally installed and fully approved by the city 3 years prior. These were not isolated incidents. Each violation carried finest that compounded rapidly designed to trap Liam in a spiral of stress and financial pressure. Veronica's precision was frightening. She timed his guests, calculated the exact moment a car overstayed her imaginary limit, and sent fines to enforce compliance with rules she invented or twisted to suit her vendetta. The homeowners association under her influence endorsed each arbitrary action, giving her a cloak of legitimacy that masked pure cruelty. Neighbors watched, horrified, but hesitant. Some whispered, others pretended not to see. The Parkers, longtime friends of our family, confided in me that the intensity of Veronica's actions was unprecedented in their decades of living in Maplewood Heights. They could not comprehend how a community leader could weaponize petty rules to destroy a neighbor's life. Even Mrs. Alvarez, always calm and friendly, had begun to show signs of anxiety when passing by our home, fearing she might witness another confrontation. Despite the escalating attacks, Liam continued to maintain his composure. Every morning, he would roll himself down the ramp, greet the few neighbors brave enough to wave back, and attend to his clients' IT needs with unwavering professionalism. His dedication was remarkable. He managed complex programming projects, deadlines that stretched past midnight, and client demands that would overwhelm even the most able-bodied individual. Yet he performed all these tasks with a quiet grace, never allowing Veronica's harassment to provoke anger or retaliation. However, the psychological toll was undeniable. The constant barrage of fines and threats gnawed at Liam's peace of mind. He would sometimes sit quietly in his office, staring at the floor, calculating how to manage the mounting penalties and impossible deadlines. The pressure was relentless, designed to make him falter, designed to break his spirit. And yet, he persevered. Every obstacle Veronica placed in his path became a challenge faced with dignity and resilience. Her obsession grew in intensity as she discovered more about Liam's life. She learned of his inheritance, the family bungalow passed down from his grandparents, and the success of his IT business. Where most people might have felt envy, Veronica's feelings twisted into something more malicious, a belief that his very ability to thrive was a personal affront. She began calling neighbors, probing for information about his income, lifestyle, and visitors. Each discovery of Liam's success only fueled her determination to dismantle his life piece by piece. I watched this all unfold with a mixture of anger, fear, and strategic calculation. As a father, I wanted to shield Liam from every blow to make the world fair and safe for him. As a man who had spent decades in the judicial system, I recognized a unique opportunity. Every action Veronica took, every letter, every photograph was evidence, a pattern that if properly documented could be turned against her. And that is precisely what I began to do. We created an archive, a meticulous record of her harassment. Every citation, every email, every photograph, and even audio recordings of her verbal threats were cataloged. We documented dates, times, and witnesses, building a file that was not just evidence, but a narrative, a story of targeted abuse, calculated intimidation, and discrimination based on disability. Liam, despite his own suffering, participated actively in this process, turning his pain into preparation, his fear into strategy. Meanwhile, Veronica escalated further. She began circulating rumors about Liam within the community, spreading lies that he was deceitful, dangerous, or unworthy of the privileges he had earned. Social media posts whispered warnings and subtle insinuations, created an environment where neighbors who once greeted Liam warmly now looked at him with suspicion. Clients began questioning his reliability, friends hesitated to visit, and strangers treated him with undue caution. The friendly community that had once embraced his success was being poisoned by the lies and envy of a single individual. The cumulative impact was severe. Liam experienced weight loss, insomnia, and heightened anxiety. He began taking prescribed medications to manage the mounting stress. Even routine activities like grocery shopping or attending to his work from home became exercises in caution and vigilance. Every interaction had the potential to trigger further harassment. Every visitor risked additional fines, and every day was measured against Veronica's ever-shifting definitions of violation. Yet, in the face of all this, Liam remained remarkably composed. He never retaliated with anger, never allowed his frustration to manifest in ways that could be used against him. His approach was strategic: maintain dignity, protect his work, and document every injustice. Every smile he offered, every courteous gesture was a silent protest against Veronica's attempts to dominate and humiliate him. It was in these quiet moments that I, Daniel Bennett, realized the full scope of the situation. Veronica's vendetta was not just about enforcing HOA rules. It was deeply personal. It was fueled by envy, bitterness, and the failures in her own life and family. Liam's existence, his success, and his ability to thrive despite disability were affronts to her, reminders of her own shortcomings. Each violation, each threat, and each rumor was calculated not to maintain order, but to inflict maximum emotional and psychological damage. Recognizing this, I began to prepare for a more proactive response. We expanded our documentation, ensuring every violation, every letter, every interaction, and every abusive act was captured with timestamps, photographs, audio, and witness statements. We reached out to legal counsel specializing in civil rights and disability law. Each step was deliberate, ensuring that when the time came, we would have the evidence and strategy necessary to not only protect Liam, but to hold Veronica accountable. Even as the harassment worsened, Liam's courage remained steadfast. I watched him carefully wash his car one afternoon, balancing expertly despite his disability, whistling off-key with a grin on his face. It was a small moment of triumph in the midst of relentless adversity. Across the street, I could see the glint of Veronica's binoculars, her eyes fixed on him, her expression twisted in envy and rage. She did not see resilience. She saw a challenge to her control, and that challenge would soon force her into a confrontation with the full force of justice. In those months, I learned more about Liam than I ever had before. Not just his resilience, but his humanity. He faced harassment daily and yet maintained kindness, consideration, and professionalism. Every moment, every decision became a lesson in endurance and strategy. And as a father, I felt a mixture of pride, fear, and determination. I realized that protecting Liam required more than emotional support. It required careful planning, legal foresight, and an unflinching commitment to documenting the truth. By the time the first major confrontation with the HOA approached, We had built a comprehensive archive of Veronica Hale's harassment. Every violation notice, every email, every social media post, and every neighbor testimony was carefully catalogued. Liam had transformed his suffering into preparation, and I had prepared to act with the full weight of the law. The stage was set, and Veronica had no idea that the very campaign she believed would destroy my son had instead forged the tools of her own undoing. The morning of the hearing arrived with a sense of anticipation, so heavy it seemed to press down on the entire neighborhood. Liam was ready, calm, yet resolute, and I was prepared to step out from the shadows of my judicial career to support him. Veronica walked in with her usual air of entitlement, unaware that every action she had taken had been carefully monitored and would soon be used to dismantle the empire of cruelty she had built around herself. In that moment, standing side by side with my son, I understood the stakes. This was more than a legal battle. It was a moral one. The outcome would define not just Liam's future, but the boundaries of justice in a world where authority could so easily be abused. Every violation, every act of cruelty, every whisper of fear that had infiltrated Liam's life was now ammunition for the confrontation that would finally expose Veronica Hale for what she truly was, a bully wielding power without conscience, about to meet the consequences of underestimating a father's love and a son's resilience. Despite Liam Bennett's unwavering determination, the pressure from Veronica Hale's relentless harassment had reached a critical point. He had tried everything to maintain peace. Polite gestures, casual smiles at neighbors, invitations to small gatherings, and even an olive branch to Veronica herself. One late summer evening, he baked cookies for the HOA board meeting, hoping a small act of kindness might soften the tension. But Veronica was unmoved. Her envy, bitterness, and obsession with controlling his life had calcified into something far more dangerous than simple territorial pride. The first sign of escalation occurred during a neighborhood barbecue. Liam had organized to celebrate completing a major IT contract. It was meant to be a simple gathering, friends, family, laughter, and the smell of grilled meat drifting through the yard. Liam had even sent an invitation to Veronica, hoping to demonstrate goodwill. But where Hess saw an opportunity for reconciliation, she saw a stage for humiliation. Using her contacts in the HOA and local law enforcement, Veronica orchestrated an intervention that would forever change the narrative of Liam's life in Maplewood Heights. At precisely 7:15 p.m., just as Liam was setting down a platter of barbecue ribs, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the backyard. The crowd fell silent. Two uniformed officers from Dice City Police appeared at the gate, their expressions blank, professional, yet edged with the tension of an unfolding scenario they didn't fully understand. "Good evening, sir." The lead officer began, resting a hand casually on his holster. "We're here regarding a complaint filed by your neighbor." Liam froze. He knew of no recent confrontation, who he asked quietly, confusion etched across his face. The officer simply indicated Veronica Hale's residence across the street. What followed was a masterclass in cruelty disguised as civic procedure. Veronica had filed a fabricated complaint alleging that Liam was intoxicated and threatening her during the barbecue. In reality, he had consumed a single beer and had conducted himself with his usual charm and discretion. But Veronica's manipulation was meticulous. She had prepared a story casting Liam as aggressive, predatory, and a danger to herself, twisting his every gesture into evidence of wrongdoing. As the officers attempted to escort Liam to the police cruiser, his physical limitations complicated matters. Without his crutches or wheelchair properly positioned, he struggled to move with dignity. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as he was carried to the car every step, a humiliation engineered by Veronica's calculated cruelty. Cameras from a local news station tipped off by Veronica herself captured every moment. The footage would later be broadcast, presenting Liam to the world as a dangerous, unhinged man. This orchestrated spectacle was designed not only to intimidate him, but to undermine his reputation and erase the goodwill he'd cultivated over years of careful living. Inside the police station, Liam faced an interrogation that tested the limits of his patience and endurance. The officers repeated Veronica's false narrative multiple times, challenging his responses, dismissing his insistence on truth, and leaving him to navigate an environment hostile to his very existence. For 10 hours, he endured the indignity of being deprived of his wheelchair and medication, forced to crawl across cold, sterile floors to meet basic needs. The psychological toll was immense, yet he remained remarkably composed, drawing strength from the small, steadfast hope that truth and justice would ultimately prevail. Meanwhile, I arrived at the station, guided by both paternal instinct and my experience in the judicial system. I immediately recognized the inconsistencies in the officer's handling of the complaint and the overt manipulation in Veronica's narrative. My attempts to appeal to any sense of humanity in Veronica proved futile. She looked at me with a disdain that was almost tangible, her lips curling in a mockery of concern, her voice dripping with venom. "Your son should learn his place," she sneered, as if the humiliation she orchestrated were a righteous act rather than a crime. This marked a turning point. Her error was not in filing a complaint or seeking attention from law enforcement. It was in underestimating the depth of preparation and resolve she was about to encounter. I had spent weeks collecting evidence, emails, screenshots, audio recordings, witness statements, and meticulous logs of every violation she had imposed on Liam. Every ounce of her harassment had been catalogued, and together with Liam, we had transformed these artifacts into a comprehensive dossier capable of withstanding scrutiny in the most rigorous legal environments. The following morning revealed the extent of Veronica's manipulation. Social media platforms were flooded with fabricated images and text labeling Liam a dangerous, disabled predator. Friends and clients began to ghost him, frightened by rumors they had no reason to believe were false. Anonymous threats appeared at his home graffiti, marred his wheelchair ramp, and his car was scratched. Veronica had successfully weaponized the court system, the HOA, and the local media to isolate and terrorize him. But the relentless harassment also galvanized us. The very tactics meant to destroy Liam became the foundation for our counter-strategy. Each violation, each fabricated complaint, each public humiliation was meticulously recorded and organized. We began mapping patterns, linking every action to discriminatory intent, and building a case that was no longer reactive, but anticipatory. Liam was no longer merely enduring harassment. He was preparing to confront it with the full force of documented evidence and legal strategy. Over the next several weeks, Liam transformed. The boy, who had been quietly enduring abuse, became a figure of resolve, his resilience sharpened by adversity. He meticulously logged every incident, reviewed every communication from Veronica, and began analyzing her tactics for weaknesses. I, Daniel Bennett, guided him not as a frustrated father, but as a strategist, a legal mind, turning months of suffering into a coherent framework for justice. Neighbors, initially hesitant, began to offer their support discreetly. Mrs. Alvarez provided testimony regarding Veronica's constant surveillance, while the Parkers shared records of previous fines and violations that demonstrated a pattern of obsessive targeted harassment. We even discovered that Veronica had maintained similar campaigns against other families documenting behaviors of disabled residents to justify punitive actions. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of her obsession, envy, and abuse of power. Liam's approach was meticulous. He understood that retaliation through anger or confrontation could be twisted into further accusations. Instead, he focused on collecting irrefutable evidence, maintaining composure in the face of provocation, and reinforcing his own independence and credibility. Every act of kindness he extended to neighbors, every professional success, every small interaction was an assertion of dignity against the narrative Veronica tried to impose. By the time we were ready to bring the evidence to our legal team, Liam had evolved from a victim into a proactive participant in his own defense. The archive we created was no longer merely documentation. It was a weapon, a strategic tool designed to expose Veronica Hale, not just as a difficult neighbor, but as someone systematically targeting a vulnerable individual with intent to harm. We were no longer reacting to harassment. We were preparing to strike decisively, legally, and irrevocably. This period also revealed deeper truths about Liam. Despite the psychological burden, he maintained empathy, recognizing that cruelty often stems from insecurity, envy, and personal failure. He insisted that our objective was not revenge for its own sake, but justice, restoration, and protection for all those who could be victimized. His transformation from passive endurance to active principled resistance was inspiring. It reinforced the notion that even in the face of calculated malice, integrity, resilience, and careful preparation could prevail. And so, as the months of harassment reached their apex, we were poised. The accumulation of evidence, the strategic planning, and Liam's unwavering commitment to dignity created a foundation strong enough to withstand the chaos Veronica sought to unleash. The next steps would be decisive, public, and transformative, not just for Liam and our family, but for every individual in Maplewood Heights who had suffered under her tyranny. The stage was set for confrontation, and this time we held every advantage. The psychological and social assault that Veronica Hale had unleashed on Liam Bennett was now in full swing, and its effects rippled through every aspect of his life. While Liam had always been fiercely independent, the constant barrage of fines, citations, and orchestrated humiliation was beginning to leave scars deeper than the visible ones. Friends who once visited now hesitated. Even some clients started canceling projects, hesitant to be associated with the controversy Veronica had manufactured. Every knock on the door, every anonymous note, every strange glance from a neighbor became a potential threat, a reminder that his independence was under siege. Veronica had perfected the art of turning ordinary everyday actions into weapons of harassment. A lawn mowed too late, a trash can slightly out of alignment, a porch light left on past her arbitrary cutoff hour, all became opportunities for fines that would accumulate exponentially. Each notice she left was precise, time-stamped, and often accompanied by photographs she had taken herself kneeling on sidewalks or crouching in shrubs to get the perfect angle. She monitored every guest, timing their comings and goings with an obsessive scrutiny, and had no qualms about applying penalties for innocuous interactions. The fines themselves were staggering. A single minor infraction could carry a daily fee, which, compounded over weeks, threatened to swallow Liam's savings. The wheelchair ramp, which had been installed years earlier with full city approval, became another weapon. Each citation claimed it violated structural codes, even though its existence had never previously been challenged. Liam's every effort to live independently was now subjected to an impossible standard, one that only Veronica could impose and interpret. And yet Liam endured. Every morning he would roll himself down the ramp, make sure the yard was perfect to her impossible standards, and greet neighbors with a smile. He conducted his IT business with the same meticulous care and dedication as ever, taking calls late into the night, coding software, and ensuring that client deadlines were met. Despite the mounting stress, he never let his anger dictate his actions, knowing that any misstep could be used as evidence of misconduct. The emotional toll, however, was undeniable. Liam began to experience intense anxiety, often pacing his office late into the night, considering what additional attacks might be coming. Insomnia became a recurring problem. His weight dropped noticeably, and subtle signs of depression emerged. The isolation Veronica imposed through social manipulation, the spreading of false narratives to neighbors, and even fake news circulating on social media had begun to fracture the network of trust he had once relied upon. Veronica's influence extended beyond the HOA. She had called in favors, making insinuations to local law enforcement, painting Liam as a dangerous, aggressive individual who had threatened her. A routine visit from the police became a calculated performance designed to humiliate him publicly. That night, Liam was forced to navigate the cold, impersonal corridors of the police station, crawling along the floor to reach the restroom without his wheelchair or crutches. The officers following Veronica's narrative treated him as a potential threat rather than a citizen deserving of dignity and care. Even as the world seemed to close in, Liam maintained a remarkable composure. He understood that any outward display of panic or anger could be twisted into further accusations. Instead, he focused on what he could control: his work, his behavior, and the documentation of every injustice he endured. Each violation notice was logged, photographed, and time-stamped. Every encounter with neighbors or local authorities that could be used to verify his claims was meticulously noted. His suffering became a form of preparation, shaping him into a resilient and meticulous strategist. As a father, watching Liam navigate these relentless challenges was both painful and inspiring. I saw firsthand the psychological damage Veronica's vendetta could inflict, but I also saw the spark of determination in Liam's eyes that had always been there. Despite the harassment, he refused to be defeated. He refused to allow his disability to define him or to let Veronica's envy strip him of his dignity. His ability to maintain grace under pressure was nothing short of extraordinary. The wider community began to feel the effects of Veronica's actions as well. Where once Maplewood Heights had been a friendly, close-knit neighborhood, suspicion began to creep in. Neighbors whispered about Liam, questioning stories they had no reason to doubt before. Children were warned away from his property, and casual greetings that had once been warm became hesitant, cautious interactions. Veronica had effectively isolated Liam, turning a community into an arena of social pressure designed to enforce her will. Yet her strategy also revealed vulnerabilities. By focusing so intensely on Liam, she left a trail of evidence, emails, notes, photographs, witness observations that documented a consistent pattern of harassment. Even those neighbors who initially remained silent could now see the calculated nature of her actions. The more extreme her tactics became, the more material we accumulated, forming a comprehensive dossier of abuse, discrimination, and intimidation. This was not just a personal attack. It was a campaign of systemic harassment aimed at exploiting Liam's disability for her own sense of control and superiority. She had weaponized HOA regulations, manipulated social networks, and even involved law enforcement to create a perfect storm designed to destroy him. Every action had been intentional, every escalation premeditated. She was no longer acting as a concerned HOA president, but as a predator with a personal vendetta. Recognizing the stakes, we began to prepare a counter-strategy. I, Daniel Bennett, leveraged my legal experience to guide Liam in turning his suffering into a strategic advantage. Every incident was logged, organized, and cataloged in a manner suitable for presentation in court. We reached out to civil rights attorneys experienced in cases involving discrimination against disabled individuals. Witnesses were contacted discreetly to provide affidavit and corroboration. Liam became not just a victim, but an active participant in documenting and preparing the evidence that would later dismantle Veronica's campaign. In parallel, Liam maintained his routine and his dignity. He continued to greet neighbors, politely manage client projects with meticulous care, and conduct himself with the integrity that had always defined him. Even when faced with direct insults or the most egregious forms of harassment, he did not retaliate impulsively. Instead, he treated each encounter as data, each violation as a point in a larger pattern. His suffering became a tool for empowerment, and his resilience transformed him from a target into a strategist in his own right. By the end of these weeks of harassment, the picture was clear. Veronica's obsession had exposed her overreach, her envy, and her willingness to exploit every possible mechanism to intimidate and control. At the same time, Liam's endurance and meticulous documentation had created an irrefutable narrative of discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power. We had amassed evidence that could withstand the highest level of scrutiny, preparing us for a confrontation that would not only defend Liam, but ensure that justice was served in the most comprehensive manner possible. Looking back, it was clear that Veronica's attacks had inadvertently strengthened Liam's position. Each violation, each rumor, each orchestrated humiliation had given us more insight into her tactics, more evidence to build a case, and more resolve to protect him. Liam, once a quiet, independent professional, had emerged from the onslaught, more determined than ever to defend his dignity, his livelihood, and his rightful place in the community. The storm that Veronica had unleashed was still raging, but for the first time, we could see the contours of the battlefield. We were no longer passive. We were ready to confront the harassment head-on, armed with evidence, strategy, and the unwavering commitment of a father and son united against injustice. Every element of her campaign was now an asset for our case. Every attempt at intimidation transformed into documentation that would expose her cruelty. The stage was set for the next phase, turning months of calculated harassment into a legal and moral reckoning. A confrontation that would finally hold Veronica accountable for the suffering she had inflicted. And through it all, Liam remained resolute, embodying the strength, dignity, and strategic patience that would ultimately ensure that justice prevailed, not just for him, but for every individual in Maplewood Heights who had suffered under her relentless tyranny. By the time we reached the point where action was unavoidable, Liam Bennett and I had transformed months of harassment into a meticulously organized body of evidence, a veritable arsenal against Veronica Hale's tyranny. What had begun as an attempt to maintain normalcy and independence had evolved into a comprehensive legal strategy designed to expose every abusive act, every malicious intent, and every calculated violation of Liam's rights. We had amassed photographs of every supposedly illegal ramp, meticulously logged every fine, and recorded audio of her threats and insults. We documented the timing and orchestration of each citation and correlated it with her communications, emails, and text messages. Every neighbor testimony from Mrs. Alvarez to the Parkers was carefully collected and sworn. Our war chest was ready, and for the first time, the balance of power shifted unmistakably in our favor. Liam himself became a co-strategist. Despite the emotional toll, he approached the evidence methodically, cataloging each incident by date, type of harassment, and personal impact. Every fabricated citation, every unreasonable deadline, every petty violation was logged with a precision that would impress even the most meticulous federal attorney. Together, we created a timeline that showed Veronica's campaign escalating in intensity and cruelty, leaving no room for her to claim innocence or misunderstanding. Her own obsession became the evidence of her malice. The pattern was undeniable. Not only had she targeted Liam repeatedly for fines, citations, and social humiliation, but she had also engaged in a long-term campaign of psychological warfare. Social media posts had been manipulated to cast him as dangerous. Anonymous threats and vandalism created an environment of fear. Neighbors who had once greeted him warmly now averted their eyes. Veronica had weaponized the HOA, the neighborhood, and even local authorities to isolate him, turning a community into a tool of intimidation. This was not governance. This was persecution. In addition, our investigations revealed that Liam was far from the only victim. Families across Maplewood Heights had endured similar campaigns. The Johnsons, elderly and frail, had been fined dozens of times for minor infractions such as grass, height, mailbox alignment, and holiday decorations. The Mitchells, with 3 young children, were fined thousands of dollars over chalk art bicycles in the driveway and inflatable holiday decorations. Even a 6-year-old girl had been reduced to tears for drawing hopscotch squares. The harassment was systemic, methodical, and clearly driven by personal vendetta. This broader context added moral weight to our case. Veronica's actions were not isolated, but part of a pattern of discrimination and abuse. We began contacting victims discreetly, compiling sworn statements and affidavit to establish the depth and consistency of her misconduct. The more we uncovered, the more it became clear that this was not just a fight for Liam. It was a fight for every person in Maplewood Heights who had been terrorized, marginalized, or silenced by her overreach. While this legal strategy was forming, Liam and I continued to maintain outward composure in the face of ongoing harassment. He continued to work on IT projects, manage clients, and attend to household duties with the same diligence and professionalism he had always displayed. Every greeting to neighbors, every friendly wave, every act of kindness became a statement of integrity, a counter-narrative to Veronica's attempts to depict him as aggressive or manipulative. His resilience was remarkable. Even after being humiliated, threatened, and isolated, he refused to respond with anger. Instead, he focused on evidence and strategy, turning his suffering into preparation for the ultimate confrontation. Meanwhile, Veronica escalated her harassment. She had recruited a small army of loyal HOA members, self-appointed safety officers who patrolled the neighborhood under the guise of community protection. They scribbled notes, took photos of Liam, and reported trivial behaviors as violations. She had successfully created a network of surveillance, ensuring that he could find no moment of privacy. Yet in doing so, she continued to generate evidence that would later be used against her. Every overreach, every obsessive act, and every misapplied rule was meticulously catalogued in our growing dossier. The emotional and psychological toll of this period on Liam cannot be overstated. He endured relentless pressure, fear of retaliation, and a daily onslaught of stressors designed to wear him down. Despite this, he exhibited extraordinary composure, empathy, and clarity of purpose. He recognized that the campaign against him was not just malicious, but strategic, and that any misstep could be exploited. His patience, discipline, and courage became central to our ability to gather evidence effectively. Parallel to Liam's efforts, I began coordinating with legal counsel experienced in civil rights violations, disability, discrimination, and HOA law. We developed a strategy not only to protect Liam's rights, but also to seek accountability for Veronica's long-term abuse. Every violation, every instance of harassment, every false report to authorities was meticulously documented and cross-referenced to establish intent and pattern. The legal groundwork well laid would ensure that when the confrontation occurred, there would be no question of the facts. Liam's transformation during this period was remarkable. Where once he had been a passive target, he became an active participant in constructing a case against the abuse. He recognized the power in methodical preparation and evidence collection. He understood that integrity, documentation, and careful legal strategy were the weapons that could not be discredited or dismissed. His suffering had become a tool, one that would allow him to confront the perpetrator with authority, clarity, and moral weight. During these months, our interactions with neighbors also shifted. Many who had been silent witnesses began providing support discreetly, offering statements or corroboration. Mrs. Alvarez shared detailed observations of Veronica's behavior. The Parkers provided historical context regarding past violations, and other neighbors documented similar harassment. Slowly, the pattern of abuse extended beyond Liam's experience, revealing Veronica's systemic cruelty and obsession with control. By the time we were ready to move forward, we had created an indisputable record. The documentation clearly showed a consistent pattern, deliberate targeting of a disabled individual, misuse of HOA authority, psychological harassment, and social isolation. Liam was prepared to face any attempt at deflection, intimidation, or manipulation because we had methodically built a shield of evidence that could withstand scrutiny at every level. Finally, as the day approached when we would confront Veronica legally, Liam and I took a moment to reflect. The months of planning, suffering, and careful documentation had transformed the situation. What began as a campaign of intimidation had become a foundation for justice. Every act of cruelty she'd committed was now evidence against her. Every overreach, every fabricated complaint, Every maliciously timed citation was documented, indexed, and ready for legal presentation. Liam's resilience had been tempered by adversity, and together we had transformed oppression into preparation, fear into strategy, and suffering into power. The stage was set. Veronica Hale, who believed she could dominate the Bennett family, had unwittingly provided us with everything we needed. We were no longer victims. We were prepared to confront the harassment with precision, authority, and an unassailable moral and legal framework. Liam Bennett, once a target of cruelty and envy, was now poised to reclaim his life, restore his dignity, and ensure that the community of Maplewood Heights would never again be subjected to the tyranny of a single malicious HOA president. The day of the hearing arrived with an intensity that felt almost tangible, the kind of pressure that made every heartbeat echo like a drum. Liam Bennett and I approached the courthouse with a quiet resolve, each step deliberate, each breath measured. Veronica Hale arrived minutes later, flanked by her loyal HOA disciples, the so-called safety committee she had assembled to maintain her illusion of authority. Her posture was impeccable, her black designer suit sharp and intimidating, and her expression radiated unshakable confidence. She believed she was untouchable, that her network of surveillance fines and social manipulation had insulated her from consequences. She was about to be proven spectacularly wrong. The courtroom itself was charged with anticipation. Reporters, jurors, and neighbors filled every available seat, their faces, reflecting a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and the kind of morbid fascination reserved for spectacles that promised drama and shock. As the proceedings began, the attorneys for the Bennett family, led by Victoria Harper, began methodically presenting the evidence we had spent months compiling. Each violation, each fine, each fabricated complaint was displayed with precise documentation. Photos, timestamps, emails, audio recordings, and witness affidavit from those who had observed Veronica's obsession firsthand. Veronica's attempt to maintain control quickly unraveled. Her carefully constructed mask of professionalism cracked as Harper presented one incident after another, exposing a pattern of harassment that was not only cruel, but targeted, calculated, and discriminatory. The first piece of evidence, Veronica's meticulous notes on Liam's grass-length lawn patterns and visitor timings, was particularly damning. It illustrated a level of obsession that transformed petty HOA oversight into psychological warfare. The courtroom murmured as each slide was projected, each image reinforcing the narrative that Veronica had weaponized rules for personal vendetta rather than community governance. Then came the moment that shifted the balance irreversibly. My revelation. As Liam's father, I had remained in the shadows, ensuring he would be judged on facts, not on assumptions about his parentage or my role in the judicial system. But the time had come. Standing slowly, my voice measured, but carrying the weight of decades of legal authority, I addressed the court. Your Honor, I began, every eye turning toward me. It's time the defendant understood exactly who she's been confronting. I removed my visitor badge and placed it on the table, letting the room take in the emblem of my decades-long career. Daniel Bennett, sitting judge of the State Superior Court. Gasps echoed through the chamber as comprehension rippled across the courtroom. Veronica's eyes widened in disbelief, the smug confidence that had defined her demeanor dissolving in an instant. For the first time, she realized that the man she had sought to destroy Liam's father, his unwavering protector, was a figure of legal authority, capable of translating every act of her harassment into consequences she could not escape. The courtroom fell silent as Harper proceeded to dismantle Veronica's defense. She questioned Veronica about every selective enforcement, highlighting how other residents, including able-bodied families, receive leniency or complete exemptions for identical or similar violations. Miss Hale, Harper asked calmly but firmly, "Can you explain why Liam Bennett, a disabled individual, received 13 citations in 7 days, while the Wilson family's RVA has been blocking their sidewalk for 6 months without consequence?" Veronica's answer, a fumbling attempt to justify favoritism and her own prejudices, only served to reinforce the systematic nature of her harassment. Her tone became increasingly hostile, her explanations less coherent, and her control over the narrative slipped with each passing question. As the cross-examination intensified, Veronica began to reveal the depth of her bitterness. She spoke of her own children, their failures and incarcerations, her voice trembling with a mixture of envy, grief, and rage. She admitted, though unintentionally, that her campaign against Liam was deeply personal, motivated by resentment at seeing him thrive, where her family had faltered. Each confession, each unraveling statement became another brick in the foundation of our case. The jury leaned forward, absorbing the contrast between Liam's perseverance and Veronica's obsession-fueled aggression. The tipping point came when Harper, presented the cumulative effect of Veronica's harassment. Photographs of the graffiti on Liam's ramp, screenshots of defamatory social media posts, recordings of threats, and logs of fines were laid out systematically. The evidence painted a clear picture. Veronica had created an environment of intimidation, social isolation, and financial duress, targeting Liam because of his disability. The room collectively recoiled at the meticulousness and malice of her actions. This was not neighborhood enforcement. This was a calculated campaign of oppression. Veronica's demeanor deteriorated further as Harper confronted her with inconsistencies, highlighting the disparity between her treatment of Liam and other residents. The courtroom observed a woman unraveling her composure, replaced with flailing justifications, tears, and shrieks. "I volunteer countless hours keeping this neighborhood pristine," she shouted. "People like him just they are entitled to nothing." Her words meant to assert authority. Instead, laid bare the envy, prejudice, and hypocrisy that had fueled every action against Liam. Throughout the proceedings, Liam remained composed, seated in his wheelchair, hands gripping the rims with white-knuckled determination. He had endured months of targeted harassment, humiliation, and fear. Yet he listened attentively, refusing to be drawn into emotional displays. His resilience became palpable to the courtroom, a living testament to dignity, courage, and the power of evidence over malice. Each image, each affidavit, each recorded interaction confirmed what we already knew. Veronica Hale had underestimated not only Liam's strength, but the full breadth of justice that his father could wield. By the end of the day, the courtroom had witnessed the unraveling of Veronica Hale's facade. Harper summarized the evidence with clarity, showing a pattern of deliberate targeting of a disabled resident's systemic harassment and abuse of HOA authority. Every act Veronica had taken in her campaign to isolate and intimidate Liam had been captured, documented, and contextualized within a legal framework that left no room for dispute. The jury, spectators, and even the press could see clearly that this was not a case of misunderstanding or overzealous neighborhood governance. It was a case of personal vendetta executed with precision and cruelty. Finally, as the proceedings drew to a close, the impact of our preparation and perseverance became evident. Veronica, once confident, once untouchable, sat defeated, her loyal HOA allies silent, her composure shattered. Liam, by contrast, remained poised, his dignity intact, and his eyes reflecting a hard-won understanding that endurance, documentation, and strategic patience could overcome even the most ruthless and calculated adversary. In that courtroom, months of psychological, social, and financial harassment were confronted with evidence, strategy, and moral clarity. The veil of Veronica Hale's power was lifted, exposing the truth not only to the jury, but to the community at large. Liam Bennett, a man defined by resilience and integrity, had withstood a campaign of cruelty and emerged ready to reclaim his life and dignity. And as we left the courthouse that day, the sense of justice was palpable, a testament to the power of preparation, courage, and the unwavering bond between father and son. The aftermath of the courtroom confrontation was a whirlwind of revelations, consequences, and public reckoning. Veronica Hale, once untouchable in Maplewood Heights, found herself exposed in a way she had never anticipated. Every act of harassment, every petty violation, every lie she had spread about Liam Bennett and other residents now stood documented, indexed, and undeniable. The evidence, compiled over months of meticulous work by Liam and me, Daniel Bennett, had transformed a campaign of intimidation into a decisive legal reckoning. The immediate consequences were swift. The HOA, faced with irrefutable evidence of targeted harassment, discrimination, and abuse of authority, moved to remove Veronica from her position as president. The board issued an official apology to Liam and our family, acknowledging the pain and injustice caused by her actions. Her influence in the community evaporated almost overnight, replaced by a collective recognition of the cruelty that had gone unchecked for so long. Residents who had once been silent witnesses came forward to share their stories, many revealing that they too had endured similar campaigns of intimidation. This collective testimony amplified the gravity of Veronica's misconduct, transforming a personal vendetta into a case study of systemic abuse. Meanwhile, the legal repercussions extended beyond the HOA. Federal authorities, alerted by the documented evidence of discrimination and harassment against a disabled individual, opened a hate crime investigation. Veronica's own words, recorded and verified by court reporters and affidavit, provided the foundation for charges of civil rights violations. The FBI and disability rights organizations became involved, ensuring that the scope of her misconduct was fully examined and addressed. Within days, orders were issued for psychological evaluation, wellness checks, and restrictions on her ability to serve in any community leadership capacity. The consequences were comprehensive, leaving no room for her to claim ignorance or misinterpretation. As the legal storm unfolded, Veronica's personal and professional life also unraveled. The Bar Association initiated an investigation into her attorney, Victoria Landry, for failing to provide competent counsel and neglecting to seek appropriate mental health assessments for her client. Both careers, once secure and respected, began to collapse under the weight of public scrutiny and regulatory action. The notoriety of the case made it impossible for Veronica to maintain professional credibility, and the reputational damage extended to her family, many of whom had already experienced the collateral consequences of her obsession and bitterness. For Liam, the experience was transformative. Though the months of harassment had taken a psychological and emotional toll marked by anxiety, insomnia, and social isolation, he emerged stronger, more resilient, and more aware of his capacity to influence the world around him. The public vindication restored not only his reputation but also his confidence and sense of autonomy. Clients returned, neighbors offered apologies and gestures of reconciliation, and the community began to rebuild trust and understanding that had been eroded by Veronica's campaign. Liam's commitment to living independently and with dignity had not only survived, but had become a beacon for others facing similar challenges. Seizing the momentum of justice, Liam and I established a nonprofit organization, Dignity Defense, dedicated to providing free legal representation and advocacy for disabled individuals facing discrimination. This initiative, born directly from the experience of harassment and vindication, became a platform to protect others and to ensure that the lessons learned in Maplewood Heights would have far-reaching effects. By transforming personal suffering into proactive change, Liam exemplified resilience, courage, and the potential for adversity to catalyze meaningful action. The broader impact of the case resonated throughout the community. Maplewood Heights, once silent or complicit in the face of Veronica's tyranny, began to take collective responsibility for the well-being of its residents. Families previously intimidated by her actions found empowerment in coming forward, offering testimony, and joining efforts to reform HOA policies. Public awareness campaigns and advocacy meetings reinforced the principle that authority cannot be wielded arbitrarily, and that the rights of all individuals, especially vulnerable and disabled residents, must be protected. Looking back, the outcome was more than a personal victory. It was a moral and legal triumph, demonstrating that meticulous documentation, strategic planning, and unwavering adherence to integrity can overcome even the most entrenched cruelty. Liam's journey illustrated that resilience is not simply enduring hardship, but actively preparing to confront it with clarity and justice. His courage, coupled with a father's unwavering support and expertise, created a blueprint for accountability that reverberated far beyond our neighborhood. The final chapter of Veronica Hale's reign of terror was marked by accountability and restoration. She faced legal sanctions, professional setbacks, and a permanent curtailment of her authority. Meanwhile, Liam's life gradually returned to stability. He resumed his work, rebuilt his social networks, and strengthened his advocacy efforts. The community, once divided by fear and intimidation, began to recover, establishing a culture of vigilance, empathy, and collective responsibility. Reflecting on these events, one lesson stands out above all: courage, coupled with preparation, can turn even the most harrowing ordeal into a story of triumph. Liam's experience underscores the importance of resilience, the power of meticulous documentation, and the transformative potential of turning personal adversity into advocacy for others. By standing firm in the face of cruelty, maintaining dignity, and leveraging knowledge and strategy, one can reclaim autonomy and effect meaningful change. For anyone watching this story, consider the broader implications. Never underestimate the power of thorough preparation, resilience, and moral clarity. Stand up for what is right, document injustice, and use adversity to catalyze positive action. Share your experiences, advocate for those without a voice, and cultivate a community where fairness and dignity are protected. Liam Bennett's journey is a testament to the fact that even in the darkest moments, justice, resilience, and integrity can prevail. If you have ever faced harassment, discrimination, or unfair treatment, comment below with your story. Join our community by subscribing to the channel and help spread awareness that standing up for justice is always worth it. Every like, share, and comment sends a message that cruelty cannot go unchecked, that discrimination against the vulnerable will not stand, and that together ordinary people can effect extraordinary change. Through this ordeal, one truth became painfully clear. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the persistence to act despite it. Liam Bennett's journey from enduring relentless harassment to reclaiming his life demonstrates the extraordinary resilience that can emerge when love strategy and justice intersect. Every meticulously documented violation, every act of cruelty, and every moment of intimidation became a stepping stone toward accountability. The father-son bond, strengthened by trust and unwavering support, proved to be the foundation for facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. This story is more than a personal triumph. It is a lesson for all of us about the power of preparation, the importance of standing up for the vulnerable, and the transformative potential of turning adversity into action in the face of systemic harassment or discrimination. Meticulous documentation, persistence, and moral clarity can be your greatest allies. Share your own experiences in the comments. Your voice matters. Subscribe to the channel to join a community committed to standing against injustice, supporting the vulnerable, and proving that no act of cruelty is beyond accountability. Together, we can ensure that fairness, dignity, and courage prevail in every corner of our communities.